Welcome back, traders and investors, to Benzinga's Pre-Market Prep, brought to you by MarketFi. I'm your co-host, Joel Elconin, along with Brianna Valesky, and we have Sean Udall on the line, the tech stock strategist. Sean, how you doing on this Friday morning?
I'm really good. In fact, I got a nice little boost this morning when, I'm sitting here watching the tape. I'm listening to you guys talk to Gene Munster, and all of a sudden, I see this nice little spike in Apple, and I'm like, oh, what's that all about? And I see they're added to the Dow. So I think I'll preempt maybe one of your questions. I like that add to the Dow short term. However, the history of when they add a major stock to the Dow has not been ultra kind to a lot of these stocks when they've first been added to the Dow, especially like 1 or 2 years later. So I think a lot of people will make a lot about that. If there is a stock that can kind of buck the added to the Dow curse, I do think it's Apple, by the way.
Okay, I'm on the opposite side of that one. I saw the breakdown through 128 yesterday and was licking my chops, but we'll see what happens today. Well, I know you got up early and you listened to Gene Munster when we had him on, and he shared his opinions with us. You're pretty much in agreement with him on all these issues, or can you give us the flip side?
Yeah, no, in fact, there's quite a bit of stuff hey, well-respected guy, I like it. He's definitely been one of the better guys long-term on Apple. But yeah, I don't totally agree, and I haven't with. In fact, I'm usually somewhat contrarian with a lot of the crowd Wall Street opinions on Apple. I think the single biggest thing that I disagree with Gene on and disagree with basically the bulk of the Wall Street analysts. And there's 2 points really. One though is sort of the whole concept of Apple Search. I thought you asked a great question when you said, what do you see about Apple bringing out a search engine, right? And I think Gene gave an okay answer, but it's kind of a typical answer, which is, well, maybe they do it, maybe they don't, but even if they do, it's still a long ways away, right? So I actually think that was a really good answer back in 2012 and 2013. I think we're circa 2015. I think Apple has been working on search for a good amount of time. I think Siri maybe is the longest running beta test of a major search product by a company in a long time. And it's funny, by the way, when Siri was launched around 2011, 2012, sort of the blogosphere said, oh my God, look, we're a year away from Apple Search. And I was totally on the opposite side of that. I'm like, there's no way we're going to see Apple Search within a year. But now you're kind of seeing people have kind of given up on the idea that they're going to enter the fray. And I'm thinking, that's one of the biggest catalysts for me, possibly, let's say, within 8 to 12 months, is that I do think we could see Apple Search, and I think if we see it, it's going to be highly, highly disruptive and be a game-changing move for Apple and a host of other names in the and large cap names for that matter. So the other thing I would probably disagree with right now is that, and I don't think the iWatch is absolutely critical or central at all to my thesis on Apple. In fact, it's not even much of part of my whole schematic of how I get to my price on Apple. The watch is a very, very minor part of it right now. However, I do think people are totally missing what the watch could be. I don't think most people, for example, realize that 1.2 to 1.3 billion watches are sold a year globally. And I also don't think most people don't know that 30 to 35 million Swiss watches are sold per annum at a price point of $730 and above. So I think if you just sort of think about those two facts, I think Apple has picked a category that they could come in and ship pretty good volume, maybe even real strong volume, and probably be a little more disruptive and generate a little more upside than most people are giving them credit for. So while I'm not a huge bull, I don't think the watch is a huge sort of mover for Apple's numbers for a year or so. I think it could be. I think the watch will be much more successful than kind of the current consensus things right now.
I've seen some scuttlebutt that the battery life on the watch could be as little as 2.5 hours and as much as 19 hours. I mean, my 3 watches. I change the batteries every 6 months to a year. You think that's you think that's just Apple haters out there throwing something out there? Because if you think about
maybe, maybe that's a good example. I think I would be absolutely shocked if an Apple Watch doesn't have a battery life double what an iPhone does. But here's the cool thing. It is a wearable. It is something you're going to use a lot of. It is electronic. So it's you just kind of know you're going to have to recharge it every day or every few days. But it's going to have wireless charging, which I think is going to be a pretty good deal, and kind of a very, very cool innovation that you'll see a bunch of the Me Too people try to copy. But my projection on battery life on the watch is more like days, not hours. I think it probably will last like 2 to 3 days. And different settings, different things you can do. Maybe you can get a lot more life out of it. That 2.5 hour to 4 hour sort of charge is kind of on that lunatic fringe of sort of what I call the naysaying idiot brigade on Apple.
Sean, what about Apple Pay? My dad works for MasterCard and he's not very confident in this Apple Pay system. And of course, the Wall Street Journal is coming out this morning with a news story that's saying that their system is hit by a wave of fraudulent transactions using credit card stolen data in breaches of big retailers like Home Depot and Target. What's your outlook for that?
Yeah, that's another one. So I used to work for Visa a number of years ago, and I also worked for Verifone. So the credit card industry is something I've been kind of intimately familiar with and probably have a pretty good background. In fact, I built an Apple Pay model right away. The minute I heard they were going to be in it, I built one out. I actually think, it's going to for sure be another $1 billion business for Apple. And the difference is Apple has insane gross margins on normal products of, 35-40%. I think Apple Pay gross margins are probably going to be more like 80 to 90%. So once you see Apple Pay doing $1 billion, $1.5 billion, $2 billion a year, that's actually going to be pretty impactful to the EPS line. So I actually think if you're going to be a bull, here's the best way to say it. If you're going to be a bull on Apple, and you do believe that you can rationally buy it here at 130 and above, and believe that there's a lot of gains to be had in the name, I almost think the Apple Pay has to be part of that bullish equation. But it is part of my bullish equation. So I actually think Apple Pay is going to do far, far better than people think. And I don't know if we've seen the final iteration of what Apple Pay is going to ultimately look like. I think we've seen iteration 1, and I think the one thing people tend to overlook is the one thing Apple does better than almost any company in the world is they improve their products every year on a very consistent basis, and typically maybe they don't come out with the absolute best product right away, although they do a lot of times. But if they have mistakes, if they have things they need to improve, they're probably the best company in the world at making their own products better with each iteration. So I think Apple Pay is only going to get better or worse. By the way, I don't think Apple Pay in and of itself is increasing fraudulent activity. I just think fraudulent activity with anything with personal identity, credit card info, you name it. Look at all the hacks we have to deal with. One of the reasons I love cybersecurity stocks, at least a few of them, is that the hackers right now have the lead on a lot of things. And so the cybersecurity space has to play catch up in a big way and innovate and block these guys. And credit card payments and payment transaction data is just one huge part of where all that fraudulent activity takes place. I think what you'll see, by the way, is that most studies will show that to use Apple Pay is probably far safer than to use most of the other electronic payment methods. I think that's what studies will show, and I think that's how I always look at Apple data. Like, remember Bendgate? There was a few phones that were being bent, and it was a big news story. I'm like, okay, so hold on. There's like 9 or 10 or 20 phones that have been bent out of 20 million to 30 million that have been sold. I think that's a pretty good tolerance, right? So I think that eventually we're going to have to judge Apple Pay on actual numbers and merits and say, okay, what is the fraudulent amount, or how many fraudulent transactions are you getting per millions of transactions, right? And my guess is Apple Pay is going to come out and it's actually going to look safer and be a safer form to do wireless transactional and wireless payments.
We're on the line with Sean Udall. He's the tech stock strategist joining us here on Benzinga's pre-market prep. S&P's made a low at 86 even here in a regular session. 85.50 Wednesday's low. That support is holding up. at this point here, still trading at 20.89. Sean, I want to talk to you about, well, we could go into Google, but first I want to ask you about GoPro. And
Oh yeah, I do want to talk about Google, but go ahead and fire away on GoPro.
okay,
Absolutely.
GoPro. Now, usually the stocks that you tell me that you're buying or that you have an interest in go straight up. This one, okay, this one, of course I didn't buy this one, but what do you think about GoPro here at the $40 level? There's rumors another company's coming out with a camera. What are you looking for? Do you like this because you're just buying more? What's your take?
I do. I actually think this really fits my parameters really well. This is a good. So you have seen a lot of my stocks by the time I've talked about them. They have gone haywire. However, it did take a while for Twitter to get going, right? It took a while for FireEye to kind of Twitter got you. We weren't talking before Twitter's IPO, and you would have been amazed. I mean, I was like the only guy in the world that really liked Twitter on the IPO, and the stock basically doubled off with the first day of trading. But yeah, Twitter took a while to get going, right? FireEye took a while to get going. Some of these others, I think you saw Cyber was sort of an instant hit. Some other things, Ring Central didn't take too long to get going, but yeah, I think GoPro fits my parameters really well. It's not a stock that I'm super excited about long term, but I think the best way I would talk about GoPro, I just sort of think anything below 55 is sort of idiotic. So, they crushed the quarter. I think their outlook is pretty good going forward. I think they're kind of, I don't know if they're a category killer, but they're definitely a niche category leader. I'm not sure I'm going to be a GoPro bull in 1 year or 2 years, 3 years from now. But I definitely think that I just sort of think valuation-wise and with the setup and with the catalyst they have in front of them, in their position in the market, I just kind of think anything, in my matrix of how I value stocks, anything below 55 is kind of lunatic. So, I really like it up to about 55, 60. I do think it possibly, the pre or the post-market high is always a great marker. The post-market high after they reported the crushing quarter that they had. And by the way, I'm hearing numbers like, or seeing people say, oh, GoPro had a terrible quarter. Well, wait a sec. Did you ever listen to the conference call and read the report, or did you just look at the stock price action? GoPro had an amazingly, massively crushing beat. I mean, it was like one of the best quarters produced in last quarter, and we had like 10 or 15 spectacular quarters last quarter, and I know because I owned like 14 of them. So, the thing about GoPro is that I almost want the thing to go down another 5 points because I just buy a lot more of it. So from a chart basis, though, I actually think right here, I think it's actually sitting on really good support. And I do think that the thing I'm going to do, if this thing can break back above 43.50, 44, maybe 45.50, somewhere between 43.50 and 45.50, I think this thing's gone to the upside. So I have some now. I've been nibbling away. I actually caught a really good trade the other day because I bought quite a bit of it around here. It popped $3 the other day, and I took a good chunk of my shares off. So I kind of reloaded about half of those yesterday. I might buy more today, but yeah, I would love this thing between 35 and 38. I would just buy more of it. I think the setup's really good, and again, I just kind of think anything below 35 is kind of crazy on the price. So as far as Xiaomi producing a competing product, yeah, we've seen that stuff before. Yeah, there's no way it's going to be as good of a product for the same price, blah, 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 blah. I think the Xiaomi product will really only sell well in China, even if it sells well. Just like the Xiaomi phones only sell well in China right now. And I've always said that Xiaomi is pretty much never going to gain much material traction outside of China. And just like I don't believe Baba is ever going to gain much material traction outside of China. So yeah, I like GoPro. It's a trade. It's not an investment. But I think from a trading perspective, it sets up really good in my framework.
Sean, let's switch gears and talk about Google. Gene Munster was already saying he thinks Google is a better bet for the next 1 to 10 years, but not immediately right now. Do you agree with that?
So I agree and I disagree. So this is probably one of the main points of disagreement. So I definitely agree that I sort of would think it's obvious that Google's struggles are kind of occurring right now. And they have some issues, and the issues are around Apple, Twitter, Facebook, and the kind of things, in my view. But yeah, I'm just not sanguine on Google anymore. I've been on your guys' show a few times. Now, hey, when this thing gets close to 500, it's a rinse and repeat trade. And I've said that over and over, and I've done that, and that has worked really well. But yeah, I think he said something like it's one of his favorite stocks long term. For me, in my sort of my whole technology universe, it's kind of one of my least favorite stocks long term now. I was like the bull of all Google bulls from like literally almost its IPO. In fact, I owned Google for almost 8 years. I was a long shareholder, and it was a large position for me. So as of right now, I only kind of have small Google positions on. I bought some at 500. By the way, I'm still hanging on. I rolled up my option trade on it, so I'm sort of still riding and milking my call spread trade that I started close to $500. But I'm going to be pretty happy to take that off pretty soon. And I just don't see that, basically in tech, the one thing you always have to be careful of is when people still like a stock or like a company, but they have decelerating numbers. And that's the whole thing with Google. I mean, Google is now it's not an expensive stock, but when a former growth stock darling starts seeing decelerating growth numbers, I typically don't like that stock anymore. So for something to happen to change my opinion on Google, I would need them to show me a reacceleration of their core business in some manner. By the way, I don't see any catalysts that are going to do that. I think Twitter and Facebook are stealing the thunder. I think Twitter is going to ultimately be, 3 years from now, I think Twitter is going to have a better search engine than Google. Twitter and Google just signed a deal. I think that deal is going to be far more of an incremental benefit for Twitter's financials than Google's financials. So there's just so many other names I'd rather own and buy than Google. Plus, it says if Apple comes out with a search engine, I'm telling you that is going to be one of the scariest things that's ever going to happen to Google's long-term prospects. So, we're talking about first day that happens. I think Google's down $50, and I think it would be very, very hard for what if Apple captures 15, 20, 25% of the search market and doesn't lose that? I mean, that would just be a staggering change in financial circumstances for Google. So now, I don't want to say that I'm going to bank on that, but those are all the things I'm looking at when I look at Google, and it just doesn't. The long-term prospects right now are, hey, I loved it for 8 years. I don't love it now. There are things that could happen that could change my view on it, but hey, I got to see them in the numbers right now. I'm not seeing them in the numbers.
Well, Gene Munster made the point that Apple seems to work on only one product at a time. Obviously, they're doing the watch right now. There's rumors here and there of the car. They've got a project on it, Project Titan, I think it is. Do you really think that some sort of search feature is something that they would set their sights on anytime soon?
I do. And, here's the funny thing. It's not so much that Apple would have to have a product with a web page, and that the product would be called Apple Search, and there'd be an Apple search bar. It would look just like Google. I mean, they could do that, but I think Apple would do search differently. What if Apple were to just sort of do a meta search engine that commingled the search result? And this is I've written about this for like 18 months now. What if they kind of just commingled the search results from all the search providers simultaneously? They put their own little Apple spin, maybe their own Apple algorithm, if you will, on it, and rank the search results from all the search vendors. But you were then using Apple's ranking instead of each of the search algorithms ranking, right? By the way, if I was at Apple, that would be a project I would be telling them to do and working on right now, because I think that would be a monster product for them. It would highlight their capabilities. It wouldn't you're still supporting the whole search engine industry, right? In fact, maybe you're trying to support the small guys a little bit. But the bottom line is you're putting Apple spin. By the way, Apple wouldn't even have to make money on it. It would just be another thing, but I think they would make money on it, by the way. But it would be another advantage of using an iOS software system, an OS X software system, an Apple product at the end of the day. And here's the beauty of it. If they do something like that, or if they come out with their own branded search, it's going to be good. It's going to be at least good enough to capture the Apple fanboy, stuff, and probably quite a few others. So, yeah, I definitely think it's a possibility. I mean, here, what did Steve Jobs say? Sometimes you just have to look at the thing that somebody actually said. His dying wish was to go thermonuclear on Google. And everybody misinterpreted that, in my view, to say, okay, it just means you're going to sue Google or sue the Android vendor. Basically, they're going to sue all these Android, makers. And they've done a little bit of that, but that doesn't stab at the heart of Google. It doesn't really hurt Google at all, in fact. So if Steve Jobs' dying wish and other people want to help him see that come through someday, the only thing that really hurts Google is if Apple disrupts core search. So, plus I think it's a smart business strategy for Apple to do. I mean, they do have Apple in and of itself is going to have to think about doing things where they don't just grow revenues by $3 or $4 billion, but they do businesses that grow revenues by 15, 20, 30 billion at a clip, right? So, and search is one of those businesses. Apple getting into search, it could easily be a 10 to a $15 billion annual revenue number for them on a per annum basis with a pretty nice growth clip. So we'll just see. I mean, I would say it's at least a 50-50 probability that we see an Apple search product of some kind within a year.
Wow. Sean, I feel like we could talk to you about this all day, but we are running out of time on the show.
No problem.
Some final advice for our investors on this Friday.
Well, so right now I'm sort of in this camp. I still like a lot of my names. I've sold a lot of stuff off. So I'm kind of in this camp where market levels make me nervous. I still like a lot of stuff I have, but I'm sort of I'm kind of a little bit nervous. I'm probably a little more bearish on the market than I've been a long time. I think I would like to see either more of a sideways consolidation for a couple weeks, or and can we ever have an outright correction again of a few percent? So that would sort of get me more more short-term bullish. So, but that's sort of my I think right now everybody's balancing the same thing. There's names we still like, but the market levels are kind of making us nervous, and a lot of the internals are kind of looking dicey at best. So I think it's the time of being a little more cautious for a little while, and then letting some prices come into you and pick having the names you like and be willing to buy that cheaper.
We've had Sean Udall on the line. He is our tech stock strategist. You definitely need to follow him on Twitter. I'm going to drop his Twitter handle in the chat room. So, guys, you definitely need to follow him after all of his research. Sean, thanks again for joining us today. What a great show. We always appreciate your insight and analysis.
Thanks to both of you. Thanks for having me on, as always.